I have come to build a bridge, so come let's build.
Make a good start now and try to get into the topic of transformative social innovation. So I'm going to share my screen because I prepared a presentation for you. As with the previous time that I presented, if you have any questions, feel free to ask right away. You can raise your hand because I can see most of you on my screen here in front of me, especially if you have turned on your camera, obviously. Other than that, let's dive into it. Right. Transformative social innovation is the topic that I've prepared a contribution on, and I've also prepared a couple of slides with some small notes for facilitation, especially in the context of mutual differences, which I can or cannot present depending on what you like and how far we get today. What I do want to discuss is transformative social innovation itself. I have a specific series of slides focused on empowerment. For both of these topics, I have a small exercise. And the final point I want to discuss with you is called translocal innovation. And I want to discuss that because I think that our project itself can be seen as a type of translocal innovation. And then it really might help to discuss with each other what that means for the way that we work together. And before I start off with the content, transformative social innovation, I mean, all these theoretical scientific frameworks are basically ways of thinking, ways of looking at the communities that we are facilitating in the C4C project. And they're all different ways of thinking about enhancing their transformative potential. So please take especially whatever is useful for you for that transformative potential from this lecture. And the same more or less holds for the aspect of empowerment, which can be seen as a way of thinking about how do the members of your community feel disempowered right now, and how, in what way might you think or help them with becoming more empowered. So how can you use the topic of empowerment to find ways of inspiration for your communities? And there's a couple of relations with the meeting on reflexive monitoring that we had to wait to not in the before last meeting. So basically that's about the content itself. All right. Let's move on. Transformative social innovation. Like I said, it's just one other way of thinking about innovation. Some people talk about socio-ecological innovations. Other people talk about socio-technical innovations. When we talk about social innovation, the most important thing is that it's a different or new way of organizing ourselves and working with each other, or participating in new practice. So there might be technology involved, there might be ecology involved, but the focus is on the social aspect of innovation. And I'm taking the content of this meeting from a project that ran between the years 2014 and 2017, which was called Transformative Social Innovation Theory, which is not to say that it was only theory. It covered about 100 different initiatives in over 25 different countries. So I'm not reporting on my own work, but a lot of work that has been carried out by, amongst others, Georgia Silvestri, whom you've already seen, but who has left Drift, unfortunately, and a previous colleague, Flor Avellino. Well, before we talk about transformative innovation, let's talk about social innovation, and this is just a definition. Social innovation could be seen in the words of Murray and colleagues as new ideas that simultaneously meet social needs and create new ways of working, new collaborations, new social relationships. So the innovations that are both good for society and they enhance society's capacity to act. And I am assuming that this is true for all the communities in our project. So this is why I think it should be helpful. However, the key word here, obviously, is transformative. So what does it mean for the social innovation to become transformative? In order for an innovation to become transformative, it needs to change or challenge or replace established institutions that are already existing around the initiatives that we foster. So they should challenge the social context, they should afford systemic change. For instance, they might result in different economic relations. So whatever happens within the community, that can also change the wider social fabric in which it operates. That really is key for a community or initiative to become transformative. And I think for our project, the challenge then resides in finding what is transformative in the communities that we study and empowering these initiatives to become more transformative, to change their own environments. And in that respect, become an inspiration for other communities and other places around the world. So change in social relations, what might that mean? To start in the top right corner, new ways of doing. This is basically how people work together. There might be different uses of technology, different practices that they develop. New ways of organizing. So these might be the types of relations that we have, who's in charge, how work is distributed. New ways of framing. This is basically how we see things, new meanings, new visions, new images, new ideas about the future, and new ways of knowing. I mean, with all these innovations come also challenges of learning, competence, knowledge, etc. And then for these innovations to become transformative, there needs to be the social innovation, but it also needs to affect the system itself. So societal subsystems, the institutions that work over there, social structures, physical infrastructures, they might respond to what we call game changers. So these might be macro developments. Earlier, we also introduced this topic as the landscape, and they embody different narratives of change. There's lots of detail in this slide, which I'm not going into because I'd rather discuss two examples. First of all, by the way, both are changes Dutch communities in the field of community support agriculture. The first of these is called Herenboeren. And that's a hard term to translate, but it might mean something like farming lords. But instead, so years ago, you would have very large-scale farmers, and they would be called a farming lord, so to speak. This innovation is very different. Basically, you try to get 200 families together, and together you buy a farm and you hire a farmer. And in so doing, you basically try to provide as much as possible in your own vegetables and food. You can work at your farm together, and instead of the farmer being their own entrepreneur, basically you hire them and you work with the farmer. So it's a very different relation between the farmers, the citizens involved, but it's also a different way of organizing. So if I see this from the lens of transformative social innovation, first of all, there's new social relations between the citizens and the farmers. So the citizens work on the farm, they support the agriculture. It's a new way of organizing. So there's a shared farm ownership between these 200 families, and the farmer is hired by the citizens. And this means it's not just social, there's also a change in the rules, in institutional reform. So we don't have land ownership of the farmer, we own the land together. And as a whole, this innovation also embodies a new narrative of food production and food consumption. Basically taking power back to the citizens, to be honest, removing it a little bit from our government and sharing that power with the farmer, and then to basically trying to make it accessible to get organic premium food the way you want it, close to your home, without all kinds of big corporations in between. So basically, the innovation provides an alternative for current land ownership. In the Dutch, and this is an aside, but in the Dutch situation, land ownership actually acts as a barrier to sustainable farming. And it is also interesting because there's not one Herenboeren farm. There's about, I don't know how many, I didn't keep count, but there might be over 20 active already, and there might be another 20 in preparation. So it happens on multiple locations in the Netherlands, and there are close relations also internationally through the Slow Food Youth Network. So this is one example. And another similar one is called Lenteland, Spring Country. This is about regenerative community farms. So very similar with one twist. This is basically an investment program. So Lenteland, Springland, is a foundation that enables citizens to invest in farming land, but is not an investment meant to give you financial gains. Instead, is an investment that makes it possible for farmers to lease that land and have a sustainable business. So there's all kinds of rules set to the farmers that they need to meet in order for them to be able to lease the land that becomes becomes owned by the Springland Foundation. So it's similar to Herenboeren, but there's a more entrepreneurship for the farmer left. The big institutional innovation is the land investment by the citizens. And there's also a specific narrative of change. So this one's, again, it's a very Dutch example, but this one only wants to invest in land above sea level, because the Springland Foundation believes that if you really want a sustainable future, it needs to take into account climate change and sea level rise. And it asks us the question, what if the land we have in our country would be owned by everybody? So what if we establish a sort of communal land ownership, and then the farmers can use that land? And the final bit is really about the restrictions put on farming practices, but the basic underlying point is a strong belief that farming and nature can go together. And basically Lenteland tries to make that point reality by putting certain strictures, but also giving opportunities by not trying to earn a lot of money through land investment. So it's not a traditional investment like a bank would do, but it's really a community investment in land for the future. So let's get back a little bit. Both examples, I hope, are clearly new ways of doing, new ways of organizing, new ways of looking at farming, at land, at food procurement, and they both include new knowledge, new competencies, new learning. What I find especially interesting about both examples is that they establish new rules. They establish new rules in the sense of doing the investment. They establish new rules in the sense of hiring the farmer. They establish new rules in the form of ownership and commitment by citizens. And they establish a lot of less tangible rules, but they're important still about, handing out the food on the Saturday morning would be one. Helping with on the farm on Fridays to get the vegetables off the land and put them into boxes for the citizens and the members to pick that up on the Saturday, etc., etc. So, like I said, I'm imagining that the communities that you're facilitating all represent a form of transformative social innovation. So they all represent in some way a new way of knowing, a new way of doing, a new way of organizing, a new way of framing. I also mentioned for social innovation to be transformative, it needs to somehow affect the rules around the initiatives. So I would like to ask you 3 questions. What are the new rules in your community? And I know that all of you are supporting multiple communities, but take one example that you want to think about and ask yourself, in what way does this community initiative also represent a different set of rules? Then the second question would be, how do these rules transform existing rules around the community that might be different, but maybe that your community could also be an inspiration for wider systemic change? So how does it transform the existing rules? And finally, what is the broader narrative of change? For instance, like in Lenteland, in Springland, the narrative that farming and nature can and should go together is really different from the dominant perspective in the Netherlands. So how does your community really represent a different narrative of change? 3 questions. If you haven't done so, just feel free to take a picture of these questions, because I would like you to go into breakouts, think about 5 minutes about your answer to these questions for one of your communities, and then share for about 15 minutes, share about 20 minutes, 5 minutes per person, what you thought of, what your answers were to these questions. Are these instructions clear? Do you have any questions right now? Beatrice is nodding and shaking her head because it's clear and she wants to move on. But does everybody agree with Beatrice? Marco agrees. Talvoik agrees. Okay. Then Maite, I would like you to make breakout groups with 4 persons in each group. And I'll say it once more, think 5 minutes individually and then 5 minutes sharing per person. All right? Oh, and Maite, if you and Laura and I will be in any group, those can be groups of 5 people, because we will not be sharing our own community insights, right?
Yes, just to check then, do you want it to be 20 minutes in total?
25.
25, exactly.
So we stop at 5 to 11.
Yes. So now they should be opened.
Communities towards private sufficiency and public health. Thank you, Joanna, for that one. All right. Is there anybody who would like to share from their group what they just discussed? Did you find any great opportunities for transformation in your community? I sense moderate enthusiasm in the room, maybe even less. I'm taking the liberty of sharing just one thing that I just learned. So Marco gave an example of really communities with a different philosophical and spiritual outlook in the south of Italy. And basically their rule is of sharing, communal building, farming in relation to nature on a small scale in a difficult position. And the strange thing is that this whole idea of sharing, the rule of sharing, that is what mostly distinguishes these communities from the incumbent rule, which basically is everybody for themselves, and that does not exclude criminal activity. So basically what the communities would like is to propose a narrative of working together that basically might be more attractive than the individualized everyone for themselves, with all the hurt that comes with that as well. So the whole narrative is here what needs to be infectious and change the dominant rule. And I really, really like that example. But I'm sure, and I hope that you all heard as interesting examples in your own groups. And thank you, by the way, Joanna, for sharing the full quote in the chat. Are we ready to move on, or is a short 10-minute break in order? Please raise your hands if you want a break. I see 2 people raise their hands. Please raise your hand if you want to move on. Yeah, we're moving on, people. Sorry for those who wanted to have a break. But that's in the interest of time. Let's see where we get next. I'm sharing my screen again. Let me get all this stuff out of the way. So a final thing that I want to say is I want to remind you of the system of the session about reflexive monitoring, and specifically a couple of tools that I shared back then. So the tool of system analysis, especially as it has been described in the handbook for reflexive monitoring, but also the version that was shared in the handout that I sent to you, can be seen as a tool to find barriers and opportunities around your community. And if you think back about the questions that I just asked you about how does your community embody a different rule set from dominant practice, and how might it change the rules around itself, then system analysis would be a tool that might help you and your community to find out where these differences are and how you could find opportunities for making more change and transforming into new localities, new groups of people, how to branch out, scale out. Similarly, actor analysis as a tool to find relations beyond your own community. So to give another example, Eleanor just told us about the library of things, which is currently mostly used in the city of Lund by exchange students who are there only for a short time and who do not have time to bring along all their kitchen equipment, their bed linens, etc., and they can share that in the library of things. But how great would it be if, for instance, they could also branch out to families with young children, another set of people who need loads of stuff for a short time, and instead of owning all that stuff, maybe organizing access would be an alternative. And might then not kindergartens, for instance, be a new type of actor that could help you branch out towards the families with young children. So it's not just about the rules, it's also about finding concrete ways of moving forward. And I did want to remind you of these specific tools because you can just use them with a community to help them find out how they can change the rules around themselves. Any questions about this topic remaining? Any comments that need to be made? Please make them now or remain forever silent. Moving on. Okay. It was already implicit, I think, in what I told about transformative social innovation. But in the end, if you want people to be, or communities to become more transformative, it would be nice for you as facilitators, community experts, to find any opportunity that empowers them to become bigger, stronger, branch out, scale out, etc. Especially because your communities are usually not the people who have specific power right now, political power, governmental power. Rather, they might be marginalized groups or marginalized initiatives. So that should not exclude you from thinking about power and empowerment. So basically, what is empowerment? And I'm using the work by Flor Avellino here. I should really be clear about that. You can also tell by the color scheme in the slides, by the way, she likes red. So empowerment is a process. So you can change the extent to which people feel empowered. And it is a process in which actors come to believe that they can and want to exercise power. And it means using their resources. It means having strategies to mobilize their resources, and obviously the willingness and competence to do so. Before I move on, there is a paradox here. You cannot just empower people by giving them power. And the paradox is, by giving somebody your power, you basically make them dependent on you. So before you try to bluntly go out and empower somebody, you always need to think about, do I make them dependent on me? Then I'm also disempowering them at the same time. Now, this risk might not be so big in this community of facilitators, because usually you are not the people in power positions that give out power, but it is something that you might remind yourself of, especially if you find around the community a seeming benefactor that wants to give power, but in fact might end up disempowering your community. I'm going to skip this. There's loads of thought about empowerment, motivation, etc., etc. But what I want to share with you is basically just 6 dimensions of empowerment. And I'm sharing these 6 dimensions because each of these dimensions you can also use to question how your communities are doing, and whether they feel empowered, and if you could find ways of further empowering them or removing disempowerment. The first is autonomy, being able to determine what you can do. Obviously, there's legal strictures here which might exclude certain things. So, for instance, I just heard about energy communities that on the one hand are empowered by the government for their formation, but they're not allowed just to sell the energy that they produce, they just need to share it. So they have a limited sense of autonomy. The second dimension is competence, basically the being good at what you do, having the knowledge, having the skills and the ability to carry out your community work. The third one, well, most important, I think, for a community perspective, is a sense of belonging, a sense of feeling related to the people whom you work with, not being just an individual, but having a sense of being a part of a broader movement. And this might be a community, but it could also be something else. The fourth element is impact, that what you do will also make a difference out there for other people, for the system, for ecological performance, very closely related to meaning, so the belief that what you do is important. So you do not just have an impact, but you have an important impact that makes a social change. And I'll immediately admit that I don't see how you can have an impact and not believe that that is important. So this might be just theoretical, but it is important to find out that people in your communities have a sense that what they do does have a meaningful impact, and that this brings them together. Think back about what we just discussed about the narratives of change. How meaningful is it to do something for a community that basically can remove, for instance, criminal behavior, or limit it and limit your dependence on others that might actually be detrimental to to your causes. Laura, you raise your hand.
Yeah, just to say, I do appreciate having meaning and impact here both listed, but I see it probably more the other way around. Like, you might do something that feels really meaningful that doesn't have any impact or very little impact. So I think this way it can happen. No, like, you really believe in it, you care about it, it feels meaningful, but whether it has impact or not is a separate element to it. No.
Yes.
But I do see your point. I think whenever something is impactful, it also has meaning, but maybe not necessarily the other way around as a guarantee.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I think it's a good point. And it does make it clearer why to distinguish these two dimensions. I mean, it's not just an academic difference, it can also be a real world difference. Also, and finally, and this one also very important, I think, resilience. So your community initiatives are bound to well, basically find opposition around themselves. So rethinking that opposition, trying to see a barrier or reframe it as an opportunity, think also back to the reflexive monitoring session, is something that is empowering people. And it might be clear already, but it is an important point to make that participation itself is not enough for empowerment. It might help you give a sense of belonging. It might raise your competence, but it does not necessarily equate with autonomy, especially in, for instance, participatory processes are government-led and not community-led. So who is really empowering whom? In fact, some participatory processes might end up disempowering or being counterproductive to your community. So participation can be important, but the question remains who is in charge. And that is an important thing to think about when you're thinking about empowerment. And this is also a prelude to the converse aspects, disempowerment. So where are people limited in their autonomy? What do they still need to learn in terms of their competence? How can we strengthen their sense of belonging when they feel lonely or just by themselves or inadequate personally? How do we help them make an impact? How do we strengthen the beliefs in what they're doing? So these dimensions of empowerment can just as well be used to look at where is your community struggling. And then empowering people is not about giving them power, but it is about helping them find ways of becoming more competent, for instance, or finding ways of strengthening their impact, finding better ways of dealing with disappointments, etc., etc. So these 6 dimensions of disempowerment, then I think, or hope you can use to help communities to develop a sense of we and collective empowerment. We can determine what we do. We are good at what we do. We are related to each other, to other communities. We can make a difference together. We believe in what we do, and we can adapt and recover. And clearly, that empowerment, the community aspect of it, and that is so vital on the one hand for our project. On the other hand, it is also so vital to strengthen empowerment. Doing something together really yields his own sense of belonging, generates more meaning together, and in that sense also helps empowerment itself, and also might lend you as community facilitators some more inspiration of making change for these communities.
Peter, just to pick something up on the chat, Marco asked if you could give an example of where participation is counterproductive.
Well, I would. The most simple example that comes to mind, for instance, would be governments that by law are required to host a participatory process. So they need to invite citizens to speak their hearts and minds about a certain topic, which would be something probably about spatial planning, neighborhood development and such. And they only really do that because they needed to tick the box of participation, but they did not give any real power at that moment. So if you do invite participation, but you do not, well, give power to the participants, decisive power, if you keep all that to yourself, then actually participation legitimizes further government action without ever having ended up in empowerment. So in that case, I would argue that participation has been used to disempower people. But I also see two people who wanted to speak their minds about this. First, Tal Voik and then Beatrice. And I might be mispronouncing your name. Tal Voik?
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
That's
Oh, sorry.
Thomas.
Yeah. Sorry, that's the name of our initiative. I was wondering, before reaching step one, to determine what I do or what we do, don't we need like an understanding of what needs to be done? Like a shared alignment, understanding of the status quo and analysis of what are we surrounded by and what are solutions, possible solutions.
Mm-hmm. And do you mean that for the C4C project as a whole or for the communities that you support?
Yeah, in both cases, I would say it needs that sort of analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
in many projects that I have been part of, that was step number one in a way. Also accompanied by mourning about what we have lost.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody who would like to react to this point?
I'm not sure I got it. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure I understood it.
He was saying, if you want to empower people, shouldn't you first make an analysis of what is it actually that the community that you're trying to empower wants to solve? So is it a point, a development that you can get behind, for instance? And shouldn't you also analyze what the, if it is really beneficial, shouldn't you also analyze what has been lost before so that you can find some more direction towards the future? And shouldn't that, is what Talvoik said, shouldn't that be the first step? And I personally think it's a very good point. I think these are all elements that belong to the narrative that is embodied in your social innovation. I do want to. I'm a bit hesitant about whether it would be the first step. Oh, and I see that your name is actually Thomas. My apologies. But because it might be that there might be more urgent and pressing needs that you can help the community with than that step of problem analysis and future directions. And sometimes as a community facilitator, it might be more productive to start with a different step, and then that you might start with empowerment and then think about what it is for, or thinking about empowerment might also strengthen the analysis. So I think on the one hand, finding that narrative for your community, finding that problem analysis and understanding how your community is a way forward definitely is an important step with your support, but it might not necessarily be step number one. It might be just one of the things in which you further help the community develop its transformative identity. Marco, and then Beatrice.
I was replying to that. In C4C project, for me, it was really helpful to start with a needs assessment, for example. It's not something I'm used to, and something you risk to impose a direction on when you start the empowerment process without really knowing the needs or what's really hurtful there. So I agree with Thomas that maybe, in my case, it was part of a process that helped me really changing my perspective and my approach. But I couldn't say if it's the right way to do it. In my case, it worked.
Yeah, I think that last point is very important. There might not be a right way to do it, but it is important to find the ways that work. Beatrice.
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much for underlining that participation is not a solution. I can see it in my practice, how this is often counterproductive, and I've been reflecting a lot on it in the last month. So I wanted just to thank you. And I have a kind of comment. Let me be quick. So I see some of these dimensions. In my understanding, they could be like group processes, meaning each of these dimensions in each specific group, it can be deepened. And in a way, for me, this is a way to empower in the sense of getting deeper in each of these dimensions and understanding better where the group is at with it, and what, for example, impact. This is something very complicated. Like it doesn't, like, for example, having a larger or a wider impact, it doesn't necessarily need that the group feels good with it, or it has a deeper sense of impacting. No, it can depend from each situation, and these are all dimensions that, in my understanding, need to be understood deeper in each situation. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying. And last thing, I was thinking conflicts and inner diversity in the groups and the communities. In my experience, what I notice is that this is often disempowering in the sense that there's nobody really facilitating these situations, and very polarized conflicts within the communities. And in my understanding and in my practice, I see this is disempowering a lot of groups and communities. So I wanted to hear from you, how do you look at it? Thank you.
Okay. Small response. You're saying every dimension can be deepened, and every dimension is a group process. I think these are two very important things to mention. And I also think you cannot just work on belonging or impact. You need to find group processes or types of meetings or tools to dive into these things. So what Marco said about the needs analysis, I think that's a good way of diving in and working on collective empowerment. And I would reiterate that the same holds for many of the tools of reflexive monitoring. And I'm very certain that you have loads of tools up your sleeves that I've never heard of, but that can still be used to good effect to work on empowerment. Your second point about conflict in the community, I think that's a very vital point. I did prepare a couple of slides about dealing with diversity, but not about conflict. And the first thing I would like to see is a show of hands who has communities that they facilitate that have internal conflict. Thomas, Johnny, Matthias. So a couple of people. Another Thomas also has as these issues. Can I first ask the one of somebody who just raised their hand? How do you go about dealing with internal community conflict? Matthias, maybe?
Yeah, usually what I do, I talk with the participants of the conflict separately and try to understand the background of the story, and try to find out whether they are having the power to sit down and clear it out. Because sometimes it's an issue that they don't want to, they just don't care. They don't want to deal with it anymore. He's stupid or she's stupid, and then they don't have the courage to sit down face to face and start to solve the problem. But usually that's my end goal, to sit them down with me, and if they need really an external help, and then I can be there, and I can be like a how do you call it, like a moderator or something like that, or people, a person who is there and create like a space where they can really talk about their problems with each other.
So you really become a diplomat for the
Exactly,
yeah.
yeah.
And do other people have different ways of dealing with these situations? So it might become quite difficult for the facilitator to become the mediator. I think mediator was the word you were looking for. Thomas Meunier has a different way.
Well, I can be as Matthias a mediator, but
Yes.
I check if within the collective there is someone who can play that part, and that is agreed by all the participants. And then I tell him, could you do that? It will be helpful for the collective. And sometimes it works. Sometimes I have to do the stuff, and sometimes to prevent stuff to go really big, we say, yeah, let's do a nonviolent communication training so that this kind of conflict doesn't grow too big.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a very, very nice example. And there might be more ways, but on the so basically we have two ways, Beatrice, forward, and Selma agrees, I see. You can become the mediator yourself if you have the competence of mediating, and not everybody might have that competence. And you can look for a mediator, potential mediator within your community, so that you do not have to take that role. So different competences, different preferences for different facilitators, but there's two ways forward and there might be more. Thanks very much for your question, Beatrice. I hope that helps, by the way. So what I wanted to ask you is to discuss in a breakout group these three questions. And I want to tweak them a little bit. So can you think of a community, can you think of an example of an experience in your community, so not you, but your community, where you saw a sense of empowerment? Conversely, where you saw examples of disempowerment, and can you find one or two strategies to empower your community? So can you use the 6 dimensions, think about how is my community, where did I see an example of that was clear empowerment, where did I see an example of disempowerment, and can I think of a strategy for more empowerment? Do I need to clarify these 3 questions further? Then let's move out in groups for another 20 minutes. We do not have initial thinking by yourself, but we dive into the topic immediately with about 5 minutes per person. Is it clear? Cautious nodding. Then I would say Maite, take it away with the breakouts. All right, we're back again. I hope you have found some interesting comments and inspirations for your work with your communities based on these previous discussions. At least I will speak for myself and say that I've heard some very nice suggestions that people gave each other in the group that I attended. Is there anybody who would like to share from their group?
So, for example, I really
go ahead, Malcolm.
liked in our group. In the end, we brought some examples, but the core was how disrupting is, commitment and then lack of commitment dynamics. So this to and fro of energy, and how in the end it brings to lots of strains and lots of problems. So and so we also think maybe in dynamics like dragon dreaming that I use a lot, maybe aiming too high or too big, and then gives a boost of energy in the beginning, but then you know, the small steps and the decision and following through gets harder. Maybe that huge start in the beginning becomes sort of a pitfall or some sort of a problem that brings more disempowerment, and it's like a boomerang. It should be something that lifts you up and gives you energy through the process, but sometimes can be sort of a air balloon that explodes and everything falls down.
Okay, thanks very much. So don't stop dreaming big, but never forget that the reality consists of small steps forward. And if you don't find these steps, then that is a matter of disempowerment as well. Good points. Johnny?
Yeah, in the same line, I found in my project they were very disempowered because their dream in this dragon terminology was a bit too big, and then they didn't have autonomy in order to transform to manifest it, and they didn't even have the knowledge to have the competence to do that. So the first thing that we did was to kind of like adjust the dream to the power that they had. So the level of autonomy and competence and all that was adjusted, and then they felt powerful because they were able to do that new project. But before, it was not a lack of power; it was a lack of adjustment of the resources that they had for the power they had. No, but still, as I shared in the group, it has to be related with that is meaningful enough. So the size. It has to be small enough so you have the autonomy, but big enough so you have the meaning, so you have the impact, so you have the motivation to so it's worth doing it, no? So that is the kind of like to find the sweet spot between those two. For me, is the strategy for empowerment.
Very nice. But what I also like about these examples that they are not only examples of empowerment and strategies, but they're also stories about resilience, about dealing with some disappointment, but finding in the smaller steps forward new empowerment to move on and go on with the project. Anybody else would like to speak? Julio?
Yes, thank you. For me, an example of empowerment is, for example, in our participatory process, a game of community that I do sometimes, is when we help people, we support people to see the abundance that is in the community, the abundance in terms of resource and competence, and so doing things together without resource that comes from outside, and take care about some common place like this, brings this perspective of this really concrete experience of the abundance that is in our community, because we are everybody's in his world close in a way, so not sharing it's a way to stay in the scarcity, so a way to give power to community, to bring community to understand the power that they have is to make come out the abundance that is still present. It's already present in the community, at least for me.
Thanks very much. Again, a very different and personal story. I think today, what I hear at least, it is so clear that there is not a blueprint that you as facilitators can use to support your communities, but you always need to connect to where your community is and how you can support them at that specific time. And different communities will have very, very different needs at different times. So This demands a high level of flexibility, but it is great to hear all the different ways that you use to support these communities, and that actually shows that you all are aware of that necessity of really finding out what your community needs. I am looking at the time. We are approaching the end of this meeting. I can do two things. I have a couple of short slides that are about facilitation and diversity. It's just a couple of comments, and I'm almost shy to share them because you are all mature and experienced facilitators already, so I might not give anything new to you. Or we could dive into some more questions or comments about the topic of today. Can I have a show of hands? Who would like to have some more time to discuss general comments and questions in the plenary session? Thomas and Beatrice, that's a small crowd. And Claudian, who would like to move further with a couple of small notices about facilitation that might not be so new as you would hope? Those are more people, and also sometimes the same people, but you cannot have it all. Okay, then as a start, I'm going to hope that I have something new to offer to this group. You never know, and it's for me to find out. So I've returned to my slides, and there's one small thing that I need to point out, and that is the woman in the picture. This is Flora Avellino, now Professor Avellino at Utrecht University, and it's her work about transformative social innovation and empowerment that I just presented. So this is one great way to also share at least the maker of these slides. Oh, sorry, there was another topic as well. I'm going to rush through this a little bit. Like I said, the work on transformative social innovation emerged from this big project with over 100 initiatives. It is important to know that many of these initiatives did not stand by themselves individually, but they were part of larger networks. And some of you are also part of these larger networks. Obviously, Rescoop and Ecolise are also larger networks that connect multiple initiatives. This is a map, they're dispersed. So I think it's important for us that we also recognize that being together as a group of facilitators grants us some aspects of translocal innovation. So there might be lessons that we can share between communities, even if there are different types of communities and even if they're in very different places. Because some local barriers and some local opportunities might actually be present in many different places. I did not count the number of times that I heard the words government barrier and municipality barrier today, but it was a lot. So strategies for dealing that are also part of innovation that we can share together. So I think we need to field going forward to questions like how can we collect across communities our lessons learned, and how can we make sure that together we share these lessons in such a way that we can also use them across the entire C4C networks. I'll not get into how we want to do this today, but I do want to share with you that the plan that we drafted from the C4C project team is to specifically do exactly this, collecting lessons and sharing lessons about barriers and opportunities on December the 4th and the March 11th at the Community of Practice meetings. So just to give you a slightly more concrete sense of what we mean with the reflexive monitoring that we intended to take place at these sessions. Okay? Then I'm going to round off your role as facilitator. This I'm going to skip. I think an important part of the facilitation is that you need to deal with many different views and perspectives. And on this slide, there are many different views and perspectives present. I will not introduce all the people, but there is one quite right-wing, internationally well-known politician on this slide. There is a Dutch national figurehead from the newspapers on this slide who is an opinion maker. There is a farmer. He might be the most easy to recognize, etc., etc. And the question, of course, as a facilitator is how do you get this diversity above the table and make it something that you can talk about? This also ties in with maybe simmering conflicts that do not get above the table. So what would I suggest to you as facilitators? First, most obviously, to be a good listener. And to be a good listener is not just to listen, but it is also to verify whether you understand somebody. So listening is actually a very active thing to do. It is not something that you do with your ears, but you need to use your mouth as well. When you do that, try to use the participants' language. Very important, especially in strong diversity, is not to force consensus. Your community can work if it finds ways to act forward. And if you force a consensus and people cannot get there, you're actually taking an opportunity away to move towards actions. So instead, give way to diversity and find the steps that people can agree to forward. They do not have to agree on everything at all. And they might have some conflicts that remain in the community, but as long as people can move on, then that's basically the strongest empowerment that you can give them. As a facilitator during meetings, summarize and verify that you've done justice to participants' contributions. Again, this is all about making sure that you understood, active listening, and when you're summarizing, do remember that you're actually taking the role of the active listener for the rest of the community as well. Now, what does this have to do with sticky notes? We all know that some people have more talent for speaking up at meetings than other people, especially some people. You can never get around fully people that start to dominate a meeting, but you can empower the people who are more introverted by always taking a small time for individual thinking during a meeting and having people write down their thoughts on sticky notes. Now, when you collect all the sticky notes, you can be sure that at least everybody has contributed something, and it also becomes easier to point out that somebody has written down something unique, which might be something that they would not be prepared to share if you just asked the plenary group, can you share what you think? Because they might be shy, they might not believe it is important. Basically, using a sticky note to let people write down their thoughts and then collect them is also a trick of letting the people who are not inclined to speak so much or dominate the meeting still voice their thoughts. It's very practical, but it works. And this can obviously also then be online to some extent in Miro boards. And the final question is to question yourself, reflect to perfect. Try to look from the perspectives of your participants, what they see and feel. Are the goals of the experiment still the goals that we want? Do our main assumptions still hold? This also is a point that Thomas made earlier. Accept that failing is okay, so don't try to be perfect. It's a bit of a joke, the title of this slide, but be sure to learn so that you can get ahead. Don't be shy to criticize, but don't criticize if you don't have any fix to contribute, because then you're only disempowering. And you might consider setting up periodical reflexive sessions where you can together strengthen the empowerment of your community and also open yourself up for further criticisms by the community that you support. Well, that was very short, off the cuff, but I hope maybe I just made some more sense of what you're already doing. And if not, I still hope it was worth your while. I would like to keep it at that for today, unless there's one final burning question or comment. You're just wanting to go out for lunch, don't you? Thanks very, very much for your active participation. It was an honor to be here again with you and hear so many interesting stories. And I really, really look forward to meeting you again at one of our follow-up